Good morning. I have no idea how to do this. There was an advertisement when I was young that said, if you want to get people's attention, whisper. That worked pretty good. Well, good morning, friends. Students, you may not know this, but together with guests from around the country, many of your faculty and staff members are in the midst of several days of conversation about you. In particular, about the anxieties and stresses that many of you, maybe most of you, maybe all of you, experience as college students. You may not know that people who study these things have tracked a dramatic increase in anxiety among college students in the past 10 to 15 years. Which is to say, if you're feeling stressed, you are not alone. So, a bunch of us are here trying to get our heads around what's driving all of this stress and what solutions might be. We're on day 2 of high anxiety, liberal arts, and the race to success, the Gaede Institute's 18th annual conversation on the liberal arts. And prior to the start of this conference, the Student Life folks hosted a one-day workshop on the rising tide of student anxiety. All of this is to say, we care about you, and we want to see you flourish. I mentioned that we have guests from around the country with us for the conference. Many of them are here in chapel with us. Westmont, I invite you to join me in welcoming our guests. So what does all of this have to do with chapel today? Well, we wanted to bring some of the benefit of this conference to you, since it is, in the end, about you. So we asked one of our conference speakers to also bring a message to chapel today. But, as it turns out, he did us one better, as you'll see in just a moment. Sharing with us today is Dr. Jaco Hamman. Dr. Hamman is Associate Professor of Religion, Psychology, and Culture at Vanderbilt Divinity School and has written a number of books on ministry and the Christian life. I love this title, The Playful Life, Slowing Down and Seeking Peace. There were about 10 years in my life that I forgot how to play. And that took a major toll on me and, worse, on those around me. Tomorrow we're going to get to hear from Jaco on topics he addresses in his book, another great title, Growing Down, Technology and Human Nature in a Virtual Age. If, like me, you find yourself a little panicky when your phone isn't in your hand, you may want to hear that talk. That's at 10:15 tomorrow morning in the GLC. Is that too early on a Saturday morning for you students? I don't know. This morning I look for Jaco to share ideas from his latest book, The Millennial Narrative, Sharing a Good Life with the Next Generation. The book draws its inspiration from the biblical book of Joel. I'm pretty sure that the next generation is a good life. Well, let's see what that is. But spoiler alert, look for it to involve some pain. Look for it to include and transcend the sorrow and suffering that is so much a part of all of our lives. This morning, Jaco won't be sharing alone. He's brought with him his good friend and collaborator, Christopher Williams. Christopher is a beautiful musician and songwriter and has published 11 albums, the most recent of which is a series of songs that reflect on the lessons from Joel that Jaco highlights in the Millennial Narrative. The book and the music go hand in hand. So I'm looking forward to our time learning and reflecting on the good life in word and song. Please join me in welcoming Jaco Hamman and Christopher Williams.
Well, friends, it's good to be with you. Since I know Westmont is not going to come to Nashville, I brought a little bit of Nashville to you. And as you know, Nashville is iconic for music. And it is my utter privilege to be with you all. I'm grateful for the invitation, Scott. Thank you, Chris. And I'm just deeply touched by seeing all of you here. When I'm touched, I typically get a little bit teary. But don't you worry about that. I'm not embarrassed about my own tears, so I'll just continue talking when that happens, okay? But I'm deeply, deeply touched to be here. And I'm deeply touched to have Christopher with me. Christopher is a good friend, and we have collaborated many, many times in many a setting. And I wrote a book called The Millennial Narrative, which you've just heard. And by the way, these copies, both of the music and the book, is going to the library after this. And if you are just intrigued a little bit about what you heard today, go to the library and you can check it out. And I don't mind if you stream the music on Spotify and iTunes, okay? And all the proceeds of this project is going to a project that helps people with intellectual disabilities live independently. So nothing comes to me, nothing goes to Christopher. It goes to a very good, very good cause. So it's wonderful to be with you. I want to talk with you today about the good life. And of course, philosophers over eons have tried to figure out just what the heck is the good life. But I would bet that you came to Westmont not to get a great education, which you'll get, not to make amazing friends, which you'll make, but you actually came to Westmont to discover the good life. And I hope that as I talk today with you, that you will recognize that and that you will grab onto that. I think you'll agree with me that you and I cannot get to the good life by having just a lot of money, because money is not going to buy the good life for us. You and I think, would agree that it's not about just getting a degree or even a good job or maybe even marrying a great partner or something like that. None of those things is going to promise you the good life. It's not even health. Health is not going to give you the good life either. And so I am going to take you to a story that is 2,500 years old. 2,500 years old. And I think that story is the most important story that we need to know today. So I'm going to talk about the good life, okay? But as I came to Westmont, I am keeping in the back of my mind all the students that I have taught the last 20-odd years. And so I have a little bit of an image of who you are. And I want to give you that image so that it's just clear who I imagine who you are, okay? And if you recognize yourself in this, then I think you are very close to the students that I teach at Vanderbilt, because I think they would recognize them in this as well. So this is one assumption that I have, is that I actually believe that you know crisis, loss, trauma, anxiety, not belonging, fear. I believe you know that intimately. But that's what I believe. I believe that you can build community in a way that is unprecedented. And you use technology and all kinds of things to build a community. And older generations don't quite know what to do with that, because your community building is away from traditional places. And the church especially doesn't know what to do with that. I also believe that you are deeply, deeply spiritual, and that you have amazing questions around God and life. But that spirituality does not take you to traditional places necessarily. You find unique places to live into that. Another assumption that I have is that you absolutely hold on to accountability. You want to hold leaders accountable so that they're just and create space for all kinds of people. You certainly want to hold leaders accountable towards the earth so that we don't devastate the only home we have. But accountability is something that you know well. The last thing that I assume for you, as I imagine my own students back in Nashville, is that you are going to make and are making a huge difference in this world. My hope is in folk like you. It's not in my generation or even people older than me. My hope for our future, whether it's at a societal level or in the country, in the world, is in you, because you are going to make a difference. So those are all the things that I bring to you. I want to bring you the good life and talk about the good life. But I imagine yourself in a certain kinds of way, okay? And so I said I want to talk about the book of Joel, which is this obscure little book in the Old Testament. Almost nobody knows much about this book, and actually it just has a ton of questions. We don't know who Joel was. The book of Joel, but we don't know who Joel was. And we don't know who Joel was because you will hear me read in a minute that I'm going to read about Pethuel, his dad, and we don't know who Pethuel was either. So we don't know who this Joel figure was. We imagine the book was written maybe around 580 before Christ, 600 years before Christ. But we don't even know that for a fact. And some scholars would say, oh no, it was 900 years before Christ that this book was written. We don't understand much in the book. And I would argue that this is the most important story that you need to hear. Okay? It's a weird book, a unique book. I'm just going to give you two of its uniquenesses. The one is that there are 43 commands in this book of only 73 verses. Joel is a demanding person. He's bossing people around all the time. And you will hear that in some of the language that I'm going to read. And then what is actually beautiful for me is that Joel is the only prophet we have in the Old Testament that doesn't care about sin, but he cares an awful lot about social justice. And I think that actually resonates with today's young folk. How do you resonate with that? So are you ready? Are you ready for Joel? Okay. So the amazing thing about Joel is that we can divide it into 6 mini chapters, and that's what you're going to get today. One of the people that I read a lot, his name is Douglas Rushkoff. Douglas Rushkoff. He's a media theorist, and he writes about our relationship with technology. And he says, and I'm sort of paraphrasing, he says, we need an opera with many acts to live by, when most people live by hit singles. Can I repeat that? We need an opera with many acts to live by, when most people live by hit singles. His hit singles, he actually means Twitter, Instagram messages, and things like that, where your whole life is determined from what's coming in next. And then it bumps you in this direction, and then it bumps you in that direction. But there's no cohesive whole. All right, you ready? Here we go. Listen to this entrance of Joel. So the Lord's word came to Joel, Pethuel's son. Hear this, elders. Pay attention, everyone in the land. Has anything like this ever happened in your days or in the days of your ancestors? Tell it to your children, and have their children tell their children, and their children tell their children. What the cutting locust left, the swarming locust has eaten. And what the swarming locust left, the hopping locust has eaten. And what the hopping locust left, the devouring locust has eaten. What an opening. So here we have Joel speaking to an agricultural people who planted and lived off the land. And a locust plague invaded and destroyed their lives. So in English, it's not all that helpful for us because I just kept reading hopping locusts and cutting locusts and devouring locusts and things like that. But in the Hebrew text, it's much more nuanced, actually. And there are 4 kinds of critters mentioned in 2 categories. And the first category is not even a sort of a grasshopper or a locust, it's actually a worm. It is cankerworms and palmer worms, caterpillars. And what Joel tries to say is sometimes the crisis in your life comes slowly. And you can see it come over the horizon, but it's coming your way. And it doesn't matter what you do, it's going to catch up with you. You know that well. You can see your grades are slipping. You no longer attend class. You can see that there's a slippage going in your academic path. And it's just slowly unfolding right in front of you. Or you can sense this growing anxiety and tension in your body, and it's just steadily growing. And maybe you have to take 2 beers to get the buzz down a little bit, and keep escalating things just because it keeps getting stronger. So that's the one kind, slow-moving crisis. The other 2 are actually fast-moving. It's the locust that can move 100 miles in one day, devouring everything in its path. For you and me, that's the crisis that probably comes through a smartphone in the shape of a call or something like that, where you were okay, and then mom and dad called and said, Grandpa died, and your whole life is just turned upside down in that one call. The locusts of life induce loss. And so this is the irony of Joel, in that the good life begins by embracing the losses of your life. The good life begins by engaging the locusts of life, which are actually plentiful, okay? And these locusts induce loss, many kinds. Relationship loss, which is obviously somebody dies, somebody moves away, things like that. There is material loss. Many of you grew up when the U.S. went through a financial crisis, and your families knew material loss, money. You lost homes. That's material loss. Intrapsychic loss is the loss of a vision or a dream. That's a difficult one to grieve, because we imagine ourselves to be in a certain space, or to be a certain kind of person, or to be in a certain kind of a relationship, but our dreams and our hopes don't come true. It doesn't happen for us. Intrapsychic loss. There's role loss. Who are the people who's about to graduate? Who are the folks who will graduate in May? Yeah, so soon you will experience role loss, because your role of student, you will probably have to leave behind and grieve a little bit so that you can embrace the role of a professional who want to step into a job somewhere. And I've seen a lot of students who do not grieve the role loss of a student, and then they try to be a student but be in sort of an employer as well. It doesn't, employee rather. It doesn't work well because folk want you to be present. There's functional loss that we all strike is when the body breaks down. And so this, my friends, is the most amazing opening act of any story I can give you. It's a story that says, embrace the losses of your life. But thank God that that's not it. The second act of Joel is very different. And this is what we read. Demand a fast, request a sacred assembly. Gather the elders and all the land's people. Gather the people, prepare a holy meeting. Assemble the elders, gather the children, even the nursing infants. That could be our call to worship, couldn't it? Call a special assembly, gather the, prepare a holy meeting. Joel says that when the locusts of life touches your life, we have to do a couple of things. The first thing we do is we lament and we cry out to God and we say, God, damn it, there's locusts in my life. That's literally what we do. The second thing we do is we say, God, I just cannot do this alone. I need friends around me. We gather. The third thing we do is, Joel says, we have to fast. We have to change our patterns of living a little bit. The fourth thing he says is we have to return to God. But this is the amazing thing. When you and I gather, the wounds and the hurt of the locusts of life begin to disappear. So let me tell you just in 30 seconds of one of my students at Vanderbilt and how he gathers, okay? Because remember, you gather differently from other generations. His name is Jules. He's a phenomenal young man coming from Haiti. How he gathers is through recipe exchanges. He will go to 4 friends and he says, come to my house and I want you to give me the recipe for the best appetizer that you've ever had. You come to my house and you give me the recipe for an entree. You come to my house and give me the recipe for a lovely salad with salad dressing. You come to my house with a recipe for dessert. And then he invites these friends in, and they begin like 3 o'clock on a Saturday, and now they are preparing this feast together. And while they are preparing the feast, he's asking them, so tell me, where did you eat this appetizer for the first time? Who gave you the recipe for this entree we're about to eat? And over 3 hours, they prepare the meal, and then they feast together. And that's his life ministry. Recipe exchanges. Because you gave him one of your prize recipes, he will give you a recipe when you leave that evening. But amazing intimacy is built. Amazing relationship is built around table. So Act 1, locusts. Act 2, gather. For gathering is the way we respond to the locusts of life.
Stand with me, and this will be a new song for you. Please follow along. I am because you are. Because you are, I am. Sing that again. I am because you are. Because you are, I am. When there are no words, you speak for me. When my eyes grow tired, you help me see. When it feels like I have lost everything, it is you, my God, who defines me. I am because you are, because you are. I am when there is no light, when there is no light, but a fire that breathes. I forsake the ground and fall trembling, with no place to hide, forced a refugee. It is you, my God, who defines me. I am because you are, because you are. because you are. I am. Hear our cry while we gather. We gather. Because you are, sing it out. Because you are, I am. Because you are, because you are, I am. Because you are, because you are, I am. You may have a seat.
Act 1 says, recognize the locusts in your life. That's Act 1. Act 2 says, gather. Get friends around you. Act 3, this is what we read. Return to the Lord your God, for God is merciful and compassionate, very patient, full of faithful love, and ready to forgive. I will repay you, says God, for the years that the cutting locust and the swarming locust and the hopping locust and the devouring locust have eaten. You will eat abundantly and be satisfied, and my people will never again be put to shame. An amazing thing happens when you and I enter into community. And one of the first things that happens is that you and I can discover the God of compassion in our friendships. When people are gracious to us, when their empathy flows to us, we can experience the God of compassion. As we sit here, every single one of us have an image of God, who God is. That image is a little bit from our family, a little bit from all the church experience you've had in churches, on television. Definitely culture changed the way you think about God and see God, and then education. That also changes the way we see God. But every single one of us have an image of who God is. I want to take over Joel's demandingness a little bit, and I want to say that if your God is not merciful and compassionate, very patient, full of faithful love, and ready to forgive, if your God is not one who repays, I would say dump that God. Because that's the God we have discovered in the person of Jesus Christ as well. The Hebrew for compassion is a word called rachum. Rachum actually comes from another word, rechem. Rechem is womb. That all my sisters have here, a womb. What Joel says is that God is wombish. God invites us into a space where you and I can be restored. What a God to believe in, that God restores us, that God notices the damage the locusts have caused. It's not only loss that the locusts induce, however. It's also shame. Actually, a number of times in this bigger narrative of Joel, God says, "Never will my people be ashamed again." If guilt says, "I did something wrong," there was a rule of some kind, boundary of some kind, law of some kind, and I transgressed that, I did something wrong. That's guilt. Shame is much more insidious. Shame is, I am wrong. I am not worthy. It's this little voice that we all carry that says, I don't really belong here, and I'm really a fraud, and if they only figure me out, they'll know I'm a fraud. That's shame. God says, I want to repair you, restore you from that little voice that always breaks us down. Because to live the good life is near impossible if the self-doubt and the aloofness and the perfectionism and the anxiousness that shame brings in our lives permeates our beings. We cannot live the good life in that way. So you and I then enter into community where we discover the compassionate God. Over the last couple of years, I've been talking all over the place, in Africa, in South America. I've been talking far and wide about the compassionate God. And I've been encouraging a lot of people that if you don't believe in the compassionate God, discover the God of Joel, because that's the God that you want to believe in. And I have discovered that those who would much rather have a God of fear and judgment, they are totally offended by the God of compassion. They don't like the God of compassion because this God is gracious, is kind, always welcomes us in. So my friends, you and I go into community, and that is where we discover the compassionate God.
Remember the valley you walked through, heaven and earth gathered to bring you home, to bring you home. The mountain reached down to rivers that fed you, both from my hand to show you were not alone. You are not alone. Remember and proclaim. Remember and proclaim. Do you remember how I first loved you, called you by name, holding you in my arms? I held you in my arms. Now even more, come hungry and mourning, return to me, come ready to rend your heart, to rend your heart. Remember and proclaim. Remember and proclaim. Will you sing this with me? God, you are gracious, full of compassion, slow to show anger, abounding in love and truth. God, you are gracious, full of compassion. Help us remember as we follow you. God, you are gracious, full of compassion, slow to show anger, abounding in love and truth. God, you are gracious, full of compassion. Help us remember as we follow you. Remember and proclaim. Come to the table. Remember and proclaim. Gather together. Remember and proclaim. Come to the table, remember and proclaim. Remember and proclaim. Remember and proclaim.
Our story is about to take a turn. So we've been to the locusts. Our story then says we gather. That's what you do when locusts come into your life. When we gather, we discover the compassionate God. And this is what God says then. And after that, after you've gathered, after I've exposed myself as the compassionate one, I will pour out my spirit upon everyone. Your sons and your daughters will prophesy. Your old men and women will dream dreams. Your young men and women will see visions. In those days, I will also pour out my spirit on the male and female slaves. So God comes and says, not only am I a God who recognizes what the locusts do in your life, I'm the God who restores. And part of that restoration is that God pours out. The text says spirit, God's spirit, but it's not really that. It's more sort of God's life force, God's source of energy, that God pours out that spirit in every one of us here today. What I so like about this is that this life force, this Spirit of God that's now in each one of us, it breaks all kind of boundaries. So when the text says men and women, young men and women, when the text says male and female slaves, everybody, whether it's gender-based or age-based or class-based, all of those little binaries that we like to set up so much, God of compassion obliterates those binaries. Today's young people know that. They know, you know intimately that binaries do not serve us well in this world. And so this then is the challenge of Joel. Joel will ask me, Jaco, can you catch the vision that God has awakened in you and in you and in you and in you? Can I catch that vision? Because that vision that's in you is about a changed world. It's about a more just world. It's a world of more equity and more diversity and more inclusivity. That's the world that God is awakening in you. Because we like to see leadership so much in terms of the corporate structure, when Joel comes and says, be a vision catcher, catch somebody else's vision, the corporate world comes and says, oh no, you be a vision caster. Come in and cast the vision so that everybody can live that way. Joel says, be wary of vision casters, because they will be very poor vision catchers. And so Joel comes to us and says, the Spirit of God is alive in you. But our story continues, the 5th act of Joel. And the Lord says, I will gather all the nations, and I will bring them to the Jehoshaphat Valley. And there I will enter into judgment with them in support of my people and my possession Israel, which they have scattered amongst the nations. And they have divided my land, and they have cast lots for my people. They have traded boys for prostitutes, and they've sold girls for wine, which they then drank down. The 5th act of Joel, and a key pillar in the good life, is accountability. So for generations, the Christian tradition would say, what I've just read is actually the day of the Lord. And it's a day that we have to fear because God's going to come in and judge everybody. And so God is actually this little creature up there with a little notebook, keeping tabs on everything that you are doing wrong, and then that will come back at you. Joel does not have that vision of God. Joel says, if you know the God of compassion, if you know the God who restores, if you cultivate and nurture the Spirit of God that's already alive within you, you need not fear this day. So this is just a day of accountability. That's what it is. And God will hold us accountable to what we say and what we do, to each other, to those more vulnerable than us, to the earth. I am fully convinced we will be held accountable. So Joel, in a sense, asks you to be a politician. But we as Christian folk are typically so afraid of politics. We don't want to get involved in politics. Politics literally means the shape of the city, okay? Politics means the shape of the city. So if I urge you to become a politician, I'm actually asking you, what kind of city do you want to build? What kind of city do you want to live in? Because you and I will shape that city, whether we do that through silence or advocacy. We will shape that city by distancing ourselves or by becoming an activist of some kind. We will shape the city in which you and I live. To be a politician, to shape the city. This city, Westmont College, Santa Barbara, California, to the ends of the earth. To shape this city is inherent to the good life.
Will you stand and sing with me? Break my heart and full what breaks yours. May I be moved like you. Renew my mind and heal these eyes to see my world the way you do. Yeah. Break my heart and full what breaks yours. All who are left alone. Your sons enslaved by wealth and power. Your daughter's stolen, traded and sold. Send me to the refugees and strangers. Send me to the powerless and poor. Send me in the strength of your compassion. Move me into action, oh Lord. Break my heart for what breaks yours. Chase out my fear with a love. Teach me the song of a hope and justice. Let it be upon the earth. as in heaven up above. Send me to the refugees and strangers. Send me to the powerless and poor. Send me in the strength of your compassion. Move me into action, oh Lord. Oh, to grace, how great a debtor I am constrained to be. Let thy goodness like a fetter bind my heart to thee. Prone to wander, Lord, I feel it, to leave the one I love. Here's my heart, oh, take and seal it for thy courts above. Send me to the refugees and strangers. Send me to the powerless and poor. Send me in the strength of your compassion. Move me into action, oh Lord. Send me to the refugees and strangers. Send me to the powerless and poor. Send me in the strength of your compassion. Move me into action, oh Lord. Teach me the song of hope and justice. Let it be upon the earth as in heaven up above.
We are almost there. The final act of Joel. This is what we read. Drip sweet wine. The hills will flow with milk, and all the streambeds of Judah will flow with water. A spring will come forth from the Lord's house. I'm back live, thanks. Okay, so in the ancient Near East, in the old days, they believed that if you're a king, you have to live next to a river. And that's where your palace will be, okay? And of course, the God of Israel didn't have a palace. So the Israelites and Judah said, well, there's water that flows from God's throne, or there's water that flows from God's temple. And it's an image that permeates Scripture. It's all over the Bible. The very last chapter in Scripture begins this way. Then the angel showed me the river of the water of life, as clear as crystal, flowing from the throne of the God and of the Lamb. Joel's message is simple. He says, you of life, so you who have been restored, flow God's blessings to other people. That's what Joel says. Christians do two things typically. They either dam themselves up and they become a stagnant, or they become a flash flood, and then they erode people who are made of topsoil. Neither of those actually work very well. And so here we are, my friend. Flow from your body to Westmont, to Santa Barbara. Flow to the ends of the earth. Because in flowing, you'll discover the good life. I conclude. I think the most important story we have is 2,500 years old. And it's the story that I just told you. So there was a people whose lives were devastated and pushed to crisis because of locusts. These people gathered. And as they gathered, they discovered a God of compassion who abounds in love, who restores, and who instills God's Spirit right into their beings. These people knew that they have to be accountable because God's going to ask them, what did you do with the privileges that you had? flowed all over the world. You, my friends, are that people. Amen. So I want to send you out with this benediction. You who know the locusts of life intimately, but you who know community and gathering, you who have been restored by the compassionate God and is vital now because God's Spirit is alive within you. You go out and make a difference in this world. Go in peace.
You say, come to the river already flowing from your house up on that holy hill. You invite us to this blessed restoration only you and your love can fulfill. You came to me when I was a stranger, a wayward soul, so lost and afraid. But you knew every hurt I had and where I wandered. You catch every tear, hear every word I pray. You taken bread and fed the 5,000. You heal one man through the faith of a few. To every blind, broken soul you offer a hope, 'cause no one is a stranger to you. Yeah. And you say, come to the river already flowing from your house up on that holy hill. You invite us to this blessed restoration only you and your love can fulfill. This water rolls down mountains into valleys and into streams that make this city breathe. Of your abundance we can flow like the blessings we know. The more we give, yeah, the more we receive. And you say, come to the river already flowing from your house up on that holy hill. You invite us to this blessed restoration only you and your love can fulfill. Only you and your love can fulfill.